The rain pattered gently against the window as Emma sat in her car, staring at the house she once called home. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her chest. She had thought leaving would be the catalyst for change, that it would force Daniel to finally see the sacrifices she had made, the countless nights she had spent feeling alone in their marriage. She had imagined that walking away would shake him to his core, make him realize how much he had taken her for granted. But as she sat there, the quiet hum of the engine the only sound filling the space around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was broken inside her, something deeper than the resentment she had carried for so long. She had never wanted to leave, not really, but after years of being ignored, of her needs being brushed aside, she had reached a breaking point. She had given everything to this marriage, and yet it felt like Daniel had given nothing back. The moment had come. She had packed her bags, left a note, and driven away, hoping that her absence would be enough to make him realize what he was losing. But now, as the silence enveloped her, she felt the sting of regret creeping in. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't just leaving him. She was leaving herself behind, too. She had thought leaving would teach him a lesson. But deep down, Emma knew that the one who would be truly changed in the end might not be Daniel. It might be her. Emma sat on the edge of their bed, her hands trembling as she folded a few shirts into a suitcase. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast long shadows on the wall, and the weight of the moment felt heavier than the suitcase itself. She had spent the last few weeks weighing the decision, debating with herself, trying to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. But now, as she prepared to leave, the sense of finality hit her like a wave. She could still hear the echo of Daniel's voice in the hallway, his dismissive tone, the way he acted as though nothing had changed. He had always been a good husband in the most basic sense. He never raised his hand. He always came home at night, and he worked hard to provide for their family. But somewhere along the way, the connection between them had faded. Emma had felt it slowly slip away over the years, like sand running through her fingers. At first, it had been small things, missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, the way he always seemed distracted when she talked. Then, those small things built up until they became mountains of unmet needs and silent frustrations. Emma had tried everything to make him see her. She had talked to him, begged him to pay more attention, to show her that she mattered, but the conversations always ended the same way. Daniel would promise to change, to be more present, but nothing ever changed. She would pour herself into their home, their children, their life, while Daniel, it seemed, poured himself into his work, his hobbies, and his own needs. Every effort she made to reconnect was met with indifference or frustration. One night, after yet another argument where she had pleaded with him to listen, Emma realized that her heart had been breaking in small pieces for years. And despite all the love she still had for him, she felt like she was no longer the person she had once been, the woman who had dreamed of a life built together, full of love and partnership. She had become a caretaker, a fixer, a shadow of herself. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the decision had come to her like a cold wave. She was done. She would leave. Maybe, just maybe, walking away would make him realize how much she had sacrificed for their family, how much she had done without asking for anything in return. Maybe it would force him to see the woman he had once fallen in love with, the woman who was still there, beneath all the exhaustion and disappointment. As Emma zipped up her suitcase, she glanced around their bedroom one last time. The pictures on the walls, the mementos they had collected over the years, they all seemed so distant now, like memories of another life, a life she no longer fit into. She wrote a simple note, her handwriting shaky, and placed it on the bed. I need space. I need to find myself again. I'll be back when I'm ready. She didn't know if it was a goodbye or just a pause, but it was the only thing she could do. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her suitcase and stepped out into the night, leaving behind the man she had once dreamed of growing old with, hoping that this was the beginning of something, anything, that could bring her back to the woman she had forgotten how to be. The first few days after leaving Daniel felt like a surreal dream, a whirlwind of emotions that Emma couldn't quite place. It wasn't relief, as she had expected, nor was it the bitterness she thought she might feel. It was a strange numbness, a hollow feeling that lingered in her chest, gnawing at her thoughts. She had imagined that walking out the door would be the catalyst for change, that it would shake Daniel to his core and force him to realize how much he had taken her for granted. Instead, all she could do was sit in her sister Lily's apartment, staring at the walls, waiting for the impact of her decision to truly hit her. Lily was supportive, of course. She had always been the one Emma turned to when things were tough, and this time was no different. But even Lily, as understanding as she was, couldn't disguise the concern that lingered in her voice when she said, "Are you sure about this, Emma? I mean, I get that you're hurt, but leaving? What if he doesn't come after you? What if this makes things worse?" Emma couldn't answer her sister's question. The truth was, she didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't keep living like this, in a marriage where she felt invisible. But as the days passed, a deep uncertainty began to creep in. It wasn't just that she missed Daniel, though in the quiet moments when she wasn't distracted by the chaos of her own emotions, she did. It was that she wasn't sure who she was anymore. For so long, her identity had been tied to her role as a wife, a mother, a caretaker. Now she was alone. Meanwhile, back at home, Daniel was spiraling in his own way. At first, he was angry. How could she just leave without warning? He felt blindsided, his pride bruised by her departure. But as the days stretched into weeks, something inside him began to shift. The house felt too empty, too quiet. He realized that he didn't even know what he missed most. Emma's laughter, the way she would hum while she cooked, the way she always knew how to make the house feel like a home. It wasn't just that she was missing from their physical space. It was that everything about their life, about who he had become, felt off balance. He reached for his phone to call her, but every time he did, his fingers froze over the screen. What could he say? He didn't know how to apologize for years of neglect, for taking her for granted, for burying himself in his work while she carried the emotional burden of their relationship. For all the promises he had made to be better, he had failed her again and again. The guilt weighed on him, but he wasn't sure how to fix it. In those early days apart, Daniel tried to fill the void with work, but it wasn't the same. His office, which had once felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of home life, now felt suffocating. He couldn't focus, his mind drifting back to Emma. He remembered her soft smile, the way she used to look at him when they were in sync, when they were a team. But now, he couldn't even picture that connection, couldn't imagine what it would take to find it again. He had taken her for granted for so long that it seemed impossible to undo the damage. But even as the weight of his regret settled in, Daniel didn't know how to change. He didn't know how to be the partner Emma needed. He didn't know how to break the cycle of neglect he had fallen into. And so, he did nothing. He waited. He hoped that somehow Emma would return on her own, that she would come back and everything would go back to how it was before. Meanwhile, Emma was slowly coming to terms with the consequences of her own decision. Her initial sense of empowerment was fading, replaced by a growing sadness. She had expected to feel free, to feel like she was finally taking control of her life. But instead, she felt more lost than ever. Being away from Daniel meant no longer being part of their shared history, no longer having a partner to share the mundane moments with, no longer being able to ask him how his day went or share her own triumphs and frustrations. She missed him in ways she hadn't anticipated, but more than that, she missed the woman she used to be when she was with him. The woman who believed in their future, in their love. The quiet nights were the hardest. Emma would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to push back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. She realized she didn't know how to move forward. She had left because she had thought it would wake Daniel up, force him to change. But now she was the one who was waking up to the harsh truth. The relationship had been broken long before she walked out. She had hoped that her absence would ignite something in him. But what if it was too late? What if the love they once had was no longer enough to save them? In those quiet moments of self-doubt, Emma realized something painful. Leaving Daniel hadn't just changed him. It had changed her, too. It had opened her eyes to the reality of her own unmet needs, to the emotional neglect she had suffered for so long. But it had also shown her that she couldn't depend on him or anyone to fill the emptiness inside her. She would have to heal herself. And that was the hardest truth of all. The days after Emma's departure felt like an endless haze of guilt and confusion. Daniel, One so sure of his routine, now found himself grappling with a sense of emptiness that invaded every corner of his life. The house was quieter without Emma's constant presence, without her voice or laughter, her soft footsteps moving through their shared space. It was a silence that filled him with a sense of loss he wasn't prepared for, and yet it was the most honest thing he had ever felt. At first, he tried to bury himself in work, just as he had done so many times before. He would wake up early, go to the office, and stay late, convincing himself that staying busy would fill the void left by Emma's absence. But it didn't. The longer he worked, the more he realized that it wasn't the office that had kept him grounded. It was her. Daniel's thoughts often drifted back to the conversations they had had, the arguments, the countless moments where Emma had tried to reach him to pull him back to her. He remembered how she would sit across from him, her face strained with frustration, begging him to be more present. He had always told himself that work was important, that his efforts to provide for their family were all that mattered. But now, in the stillness of their home, he saw how wrong he had been. One evening, as he sat alone at the kitchen table, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't just wait for Emma to come back. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. If there was any chance of salvaging what they had, he needed to change. He needed to be the man she had always deserved, the husband she had wanted. The next day, Daniel called a therapist. He had never been one to talk about his feelings. Not with Emma, not with anyone, but he knew he had to start somewhere. The thought of facing his own flaws in such a raw, vulnerable way terrified him, but was the only path forward. He scheduled weekly sessions, determined to understand the patterns of his life that had led him to this point, the emotional detachment, the way he had buried his feelings under the weight of work and ambition. Therapy wasn't easy. Daniel found it uncomfortable, even painful at times, to confront his own shortcomings. He had to admit to himself that he had been emotionally absent, that he had taken Emma for granted, and that he had prioritized his career over the relationship he had promised to cherish. But as the weeks went by, he started to understand the deeper reasons behind his actions. His fear of vulnerability, his need to control every aspect of his life, had kept him from truly opening up to Emma, from truly being there for her when she needed him most. Along with therapy, Daniel made an effort to change his behavior. He stopped working late on most nights, taking time to come home early, even if it meant leaving unfinished projects behind. He began to help more around the house, taking on tasks that had always been Emma's responsibility. At first, it felt strange, awkward even, but with each small gesture, making dinner, doing the laundry, taking care of the kids without being asked, he began to feel a sense of connection that had long been absent. But the most significant change was in his attitude. He stopped dismissing Emma's feelings, stopped brushing off her concerns. He learned to listen, really listen, to what she had been saying all those years. He began to see her not as a partner in a transaction, but as a woman with her own dreams, desires, and needs that had been neglected for far too long. Yet, despite all his efforts, Daniel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it might be too late. He had waited too long to change, and now Emma was gone. He had made promises to himself, to her, that he would do better, but the damage had already been done. He wasn't sure if she would ever come back. He wasn't sure if any of his efforts could undo the years of neglect. But Daniel refused to give up. He couldn't. He had learned the hard way that change didn't come easily, but it was possible. And if there was any chance of winning back Emma, of showing her that he had truly changed, he would fight for it, no matter how long it took. So he continued his therapy, continued his efforts to be more present, more attentive, more loving. Every day, he worked on becoming the man he should have been all along, hoping that one day Emma would see the changes he had made, and that they could rebuild a life they had once shared. Daniel stood in the living room, his hands clenched at his sides as he stared at the empty space where Emma's things used to be. Her clothes were gone from the closet, her favorite books no longer lined the shelves, and the little trinkets they had picked up together over the years, the souvenirs from vacations, the photo frames, were all absent. The house, which had once felt like a warm, lively home, now felt like a shell, a hollow echo of what it used to be. The silence was deafening. Despite his efforts to change, despite the months of therapy and the adjustments he'd made, Daniel could ignore the overwhelming truth that weighed on him. Emma was no longer part of this life. It wasn't just her physical absence that cut so deep. It was a realization that he had taken her for granted for so long. He had never truly appreciated her, not in the way she deserved. For years, he had buried himself in work, in the comfort routine, believing that providing for their family was enough, that love didn't need attention or effort. But now, looking around a quiet house, Daniel understood the painful truth. Love needed everything. It needed presence. It needed kindness. It needed effort. Things he had neglected to give Emma until it was too late. He could no longer deny it. His actions had caused a fracture in their marriage, and no amount of change, no matter how sincere, could erase the past. As the days went on, Daniel became painfully aware of the weight of what he had lost. There was no one to come home to, no one to share the mundane details of the day with, no one to laugh with over a cup of coffee, or argue with over the little things. The house felt too big now, too empty. He couldn't even remember the last time he had truly talked to Emma, the last time they had shared something real. They had drifted so far apart, and now, that distance seemed insurmountable. It was in these moments of silence, these moments of reflection, that Daniel's heart truly broke. He realized that the life he had built without Emma, the career, the success, the material comforts, meant nothing without her. His priorities had been all wrong, and now, as he stood in the remnants of their shared life, he knew that no achievement could ever replace the love he had lost. The hardest part wasn't just losing her. It was realizing that he had lost himself in the process. 2. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel reached a crossroads. He had tried everything he knew, therapy, self-reflection, and countless gestures to prove that he had changed. Yet, despite his best efforts, Emma remained distant, her absence a constant reminder of the irreparable damage he had caused. One evening, as Daniel sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, he realized something crucial. He had been waiting for Emma to return, waiting for her to come back and see the changes he had made. But in doing so, he had missed the point entirely. It wasn't enough to hope she would come back. He couldn't wait around for her forgiveness or for a miracle to fix what had been broken. He had to make the decision, once and for all, to take responsibility for his mistakes, for their marriage, and for the life they had lost. The decision wasn't easy, and it wasn't one he could make in a moment of clarity or sudden inspiration. It came from a place of deep humility and pain. Daniel realized that no matter what happened with Emma, he had to move forward with integrity. He would no longer let guilt or shame control him. He would prove to himself that he could be the man he wanted to be, whether or not Emma ever came back. He would continue to change, for himself, for the lessons he had learned, and for the family they had once been. But he also knew that he couldn't force Emma to come back. Her journey was her own, and the decision to rebuild or to part ways was hers to make. In that quiet moment, Daniel made peace with the uncertainty of the future. He had done everything he could. Now it was time to let go. In the months that followed, Daniel found a quiet kind of peace. He had done everything he could to change, not just for Emma, but for himself. He had learned that love couldn't be demanded, nor could it be fixed with promises alone. It required continuous effort, understanding, and deep connection. But he also understood that change didn't always lead to reconciliation. Sometimes, the hardest part was letting go of what you couldn't control. Emma never returned. And while the pain of that truth lingered, Daniel no longer blamed himself for failure of their marriage. He had learned to accept that some things were beyond repair, that some wounds couldn't be healed by time or effort alone. His journey had taught him the value of presence, of listening, and of living with intention. These lessons, though born from heartache, were the ones that would guide him forward. He didn't know what the future held, or if love would find him again. But for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt ready to live authentically, with a sense of self-worth he had long neglected. He had made peace with his past, and now he was moving forward, not in search of redemption from others, but in pursuit of redemption for himself.